So someone says online, if
Yes.
Jesus taught against the law of God, he is a sinner and disqualified to be the Messiah. And yes, we agree. Please read 1 Corinthians 9. For since I am free from all, I can make myself a slave to all in order to gain even more people. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to gain the Jews. To those under the law, that is the law of Moses, I became like one under the law, that is of Moses, because the subject has to do with the Jews. Though I myself, says Paul, am not under the law, again, the law of Moses, to gain those under the law of Moses. To those free from the law of Moses, I became like one free from the law. And then here's a change. And this is what I want you to look at to the commentator here. If Jesus taught against the law of God, look what Paul does here. Verse 21, to those free from the law, I became like one free from the law, though I am not free from God's law, but under the law or subject to the law of Christ, to gain those free from the law. You see how for Paul now, the law of God, as the commentator has here, God's law is now defined not as the law of the Jews, the law of Moses, but the law of Christ. So when you ask these questions or when you make these statements, you have to ask yourself, which law are we talking about? For Paul, there are two laws, and this is throughout his letters. In Romans, the same deal. That's why you have to be careful with Paul, because Paul is a Christian. Paul says things like, in Christ there's neither Jew nor Greek. Paul says things like in Galatians chapter 5, circumcision means nothing, 1 Corinthians 7. So Paul clearly is not under the law. And he says it right here very explicitly. Verse 20, I myself am not under the law of Moses. So again, back to the comment here of if Jesus taught against the law of God, but then we have to ask, what does the New Testament, or in this case specifically, what does Paul call the law of God now? Does Paul remain under the law of Moses, under the law given at Sinai? By the way, the phrase the law of Moses, which some Sabbatarians out there find offensive almost, is
Yes.
a biblical phrase.
Oh, yes.
It's used by Jesus himself in the Gospel of John. Of course, we know that the law of Moses is the law that was given by God, but that's the language of the Bible, and specifically the New Testament.
Of course, if he taught against the law of Messiah, his own law, then of course he's wrong. But it's completely false to say that Jesus simply copied the law of Moses in the letter. He begins to bring in the new covenant, and Paul continues with that. It's a process, it doesn't happen overnight. But if you look at all of the teaching of Jesus and Paul, you'll see that the law of Moses in the letter is no more for us, particularly as I gave you three things: circumcision, the food laws,
The
what was the other thing?
festivals
The festivals, the
or
calendar.
special days.
Those are the three areas which have been
Right.
drastically changed in the new covenant.